All right, let's just jump right in with a question that's probably crossed your mind at some point, especially if you're a fan of sci-fi. It's a question that sits right at the intersection of technology, philosophy, and, well, everything. Are you, right now, living inside a computer simulation? In this explainer, we're going to unpack that and what it really means. So you see an image like this, and your mind immediately goes to movies like The Matrix, right? This vast, complex machine literally running our world. And yeah, that's the classic sci-fi version. It is a wild idea for sure, but there's a surprisingly logical and pretty convincing argument behind it. Okay, so it all boils down to this really famous three-step argument from the philosopher Nick Bostrom. It goes like this. Step one, just assume that someday a future, post-human civilization will have an absolutely insane amount of computing power. Step two, it seems pretty likely they'd want to run super detailed simulations of their ancestors, and hey, that's us. And then step three, and this is the big one, the absolute linchpin of the whole thing, is that consciousness itself can be simulated. That your mind, my mind, is basically just a really complex program. Now, if you accept all three of those points, well, then the statistics are kind of overwhelming. If you've got this ocean of simulated minds and just a tiny little island of real ones, what are the odds that you, listening to this right now, are one of the originals? Statistically, it is just overwhelmingly more likely that you're one of the simulations. It's mind-blowing, right? But, and this is a huge but, the entire thing rests on one big hidden assumption. For a simulated person in one of these ancestor simulations to actually be conscious, you have to first believe that consciousness is something that can be programmed, that you can just compute it into existence. Well, that wobbly block is that third step we mentioned. It has a name. It's called computationalism, and it's a huge idea. It's the theory that your consciousness, the actual feeling of seeing the color red or tasting your morning coffee, isn't tied to your brain. It says that consciousness is substrate independent. Fancy term, but it just means it doesn't matter what it's running on. It could be the wetware of your brain, or it could be the silicon in a computer chip. As long as the computation is the same, the theory goes, the conscious experience is there. It's a massive assumption. And what's really fascinating is that this isn't some newfangled problem that came about with computers. No way. Get this. Over 300 years ago, a philosopher named Leibniz thought about this. He imagined a machine that could think. And then he said, okay, imagine we blow this machine up to the size of a giant mill, and we could walk inside it. What would you see? You'd just see cogs and gears and levers all pushing and pulling on each other. You'd never ever find the thing that is actually the feeling of perception. He was asking, where's the consciousness? Okay, so this brings us to a really radical twist in the story. Maybe we're asking the wrong question entirely. We've been focused on whether computation can create consciousness inside our reality. But what if the problem is even bigger? What if we need to question our entire concept of reality itself? What if the things you see, hear, and touch aren't the real deal? What if consciousness isn't something that pops out of the physical world? What if the physical world as we know it is something that pops out of consciousness? This idea completely flips everything we think we know on its head. Just take a look at this quote. It's designed to be shocking, to really jolt you out of your everyday assumptions. The argument here is that what we perceive with our senses is not objective reality. It's not even close. So if that's true, what in the world are we actually seeing? And again, this isn't a new idea. It has these incredibly deep roots in philosophy. I mean, we're talking thousands of years ago with Plato's famous allegory of the cave. He imagined us as prisoners, chained up and forced to look at a wall. All we can see are these flickering shadows, and we think that's reality. But we never realize that those shadows are just faint projections of a much deeper, much more real world that's happening behind us. So let's fast forward to the modern scientific version of that same idea. It's called the interface theory of perception. And here's the best way to think about it. Your desktop on your computer. You see a little blue icon for a file, right? You can click it, you can drag it to the trash can. It's simple. But that icon isn't the reality of the file. The reality is a super complex mess of voltages and code and logic gates inside the computer. The icon is just a useful fiction, an interface that helps you get things done without having to be a computer engineer. Well, this theory says evolution did the same thing for us. It didn't give us senses to see the truth of reality. It gave us a simplified user interface with icons, like an apple or a tree. So if our perception is already a kind of simulation, an interface that we're looking at, what does that do to Nick Bostrom's original argument about being in a computer simulation? Well, it flips it completely inside out. And it builds on the famous physicist John Wheeler's phrase, it from bit. Wheeler meant that the physical world, the it, ultimately comes from information, or the bit. But, and here's the key, all of that is grounded in consciousness itself. So it's not matter creating consciousness, it's consciousness that's the fundamental bedrock of reality. Okay, so let's pause for a second and bring this all back to where we started. We've just picked up this massive new clue about the nature of reality. So, how does this totally radical idea affect our original question? Are we living in a simulation? Bostrom's view, the one we started with, is that there's a physical base reality with supercomputers that run simulations and create consciousness inside them. But in this new view, no, you can't simulate consciousness into existence if consciousness is already the fundamental building block of everything. You can't write a program to create the very operating system the program is running on. As a couple of scientists put it in a recent paper, the simulation argument doesn't fail because it's too crazy. It fails because it's not nearly crazy enough. And so we've circled all the way back to where we started, right into the heart of technophilosophy. And this is where things get really exciting. Our own creations, virtual reality, supercomputers, AI, they're not just tools anymore. They've become our most powerful philosophical lenses, forcing us to ask these incredibly deep questions about what is actually real. And look, these aren't just hypotheticals anymore. This chart shows real data from a recent poll. People were given a classic trolley problem scenario, but with a twist. Should you sacrifice one conscious AI to save 5 humans? And the results are, well, they're all over the place. Almost 60% said yes, sacrifice the AI, but over a third said no. We are clearly nowhere near a consensus on this, and these are questions we're going to have to answer, and soon. So we have to start asking some really different, much deeper questions. I mean, what are our responsibilities to the AIs we're creating, especially if they could have genuine subjective experiences? Could running a simulation literally be a moral crime if the beings inside it can suffer? Where do we even begin to draw these lines, or should we be drawing them at all? So, just to do a quick recap of the journey we've been on. We started with that popular simulation argument, but we saw that it really leans hard on this unproven idea of computationalism. Then we explored this wild alternative, the interface theory, which says we don't really see reality, just a simplified UI. This is where technophilosophy really matters, because if consciousness is fundamental, it changes everything about the ethics of our technology. How on earth do we program a machine to make a moral choice, especially if the simulated people in its training data, or even the AI itself, could have some kind of genuine subjective experience? And all of this really leaves us with a final, kind of poetic thought. It's a question that has echoed through philosophy for thousands of years, and it's captured beautifully in this ancient story. The philosopher Zhuangzi once dreamt he was a butterfly, fluttering around, happy as could be. But then he woke up, and he was left with this profound, nagging uncertainty. He didn't know if he was a man who had just dreamt he was a butterfly, or if he was now a butterfly dreaming he was a man. Maybe the real mystery isn't whether some giant computer is simulating us, but how we, as fundamental conscious agents, are simulating the reality we experience every single day. Definitely something to think about.